Hi, this is Aditya and welcome to Sankham Martech channel. Many of you have asked me to do a video on AEM general backend concepts like Sling models and OSGI services. So I have come up with this foundational video. In this video, I am going to discuss some concepts which will be foundational for you to understand any of the AEM backend concepts like Sling models and OSGI services. Hope you will watch this video until the end. If you are liking the videos which I am doing, please subscribe to my channel and also please hit on that like button. So let's get started with the presentation. Okay, so let's try to understand as to what is happening from the beginning. Okay, so first the user, he is opening the browser and he is trying to request a particular page. Then it goes through CDN and it also goes to web server dispatcher. So this flow we have already discussed, so I will not repeat it here. And let us suppose it is hitting the publish instance. So it bypasses the CDN and dispatcher and it is coming to the publish instance. So in the publish instance, there will be the OSGI framework. So the first entry point for this request is the OSGI framework. So let's see what happens in the OSGI framework. Okay, so this is the OSGI framework. Okay, so OSGI framework has an interface which is OSGI HTTP service. Okay, so this is the one which receives that particular request. Okay, and here we have this Sling module, which is one of the service, which is one of the OSGI service. Okay, so this Sling module has a servlet which is Sling main servlet. Okay, so let us suppose this is the Sling bundle. Okay, in this Sling bundle, what will be there is there will be an implementation of this OSGI HTTP service. Okay, so the implementation will be present in this particular bundle. So what we will say is we will register a servlet. Okay, so when a particular namespace is nothing but like a URL pattern. Okay, so the /temp and /something, right? So like that, if there is certain URL pattern, then the request has to go into this particular servlet, right? So that redirection has to happen. So for that, what we need to do is we need to register a particular servlet for this OSGI, register a particular servlet as a OSGI service, right? So that registration is present as part of this bundle. Okay, so then what happens is whenever a request comes, so then the first entry point into the Sling will be this Sling main servlet. Okay, so all this code is written by the Sling team and AEM team. So whenever the request comes in, it hits the OSGI framework, and from there it will see to which existing service it has to pass the request on to, and this Sling bundle is already registered with this OSGI service, so it will pass on the request into this Sling main servlet. Okay, and this OSGI framework, right, it also creates the HTTP servlet request and response. Okay, these are the two objects which it will create. Okay, so HTTP servlet request will have all the form details, if any, or any of the request parameters which we are getting from the client, which is the web browser. Okay, so all those input details will be present as part of the HTTP servlet request object, and it will also create the servlet response object for the response to be set. Okay, and these two servlet request and servlet response objects will be passed on to this Sling main servlet. Okay, so this is the Sling main servlet is the first entry point into the Sling framework. Okay, so this is the second thing. Okay, so then what happens is this Sling main servlet will kick in and it will call this resource resolver factory. Okay, so this resource resolver factory, what is the job of this resource resolver factory is to create the resource resolver. Okay, so what is the resource resolver? Okay, so to understand what is resource resolver, we need to understand what is a resource. Okay, if we think of an AEM, right, any code which we write or anything which is present as part of the JCR, be it the content node or the script, everything is a resource. Okay, so ultimately what is the user who is the from the browser, right? He is trying to access something from the backend, either it be in the JCR or be it in the MongoDB or any of the database. This client user is ultimately trying to access something from the backend. So anything which is trying to access in the backend is a resource. okay, and how it needs to be accessed and what is the code related to it. Everything will be defined as part of the resource resolver. And resource resolver factory is the implementation which knows how to create this particular resource resolver. Okay, in this particular case of AEM, generally the resource resolver will connect to the JCR repository, but we can allow it to connect to the MongoDB or any other backend stuff. Basically, it can connect to any of the resource provider. Okay, ultimately the resource resolver will have the code as to how it has to connect to the backend code and get the relevant data and show it into the front end. So that related code will be there as part of the resource resolver. Okay, so then this resource resolver factory will create the resource resolver object, and this resource resolver object will be ultimately passed on to this Sling main servlet. Okay, and this Sling main servlet, what it does is it will wrap the HTTP request and response. So here we have the pure HTTP servlet request and servlet response, right? So these two objects, it will wrap into another object which is called as HTTP Sling servlet request. Okay, so it creates a new class which is HTTP Sling servlet request. In this class, there will be one attribute which is this HTTP HTTP servlet request. Okay, so in the Sling servlet request, one of the attribute is HTTP servlet request, and the other attribute will be resource resolver. Okay, so like that many attributes will be there. So the main purpose of this wrapping of the HTTP servlet request into Sling servlet request is to have the additional parameters or objects like this resource resolver which are specific to the Sling. Okay, so it will add all these attributes also into these class along with the other input attributes which it is getting from the OSGI framework. Okay, so till here we have got as to how we need to connect to the backend and how exactly we can pull the stuff. So all that code and everything is ready now. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to actually pull that code. Let's see the process how it works. Okay, so let us suppose the user is trying to access this particular URL /content weekend usen about us.html. So that's how the URL path will be asked from the browser. Okay, so then the first request comes to the Sling main servlet. Okay, so then Sling main servlet will ask the resource resolver factory to create the resource resolver. So that is created now. So then what happens is from the Sling main servlet, we call the resolver function which is present in this resource resolver. Okay, so resource resolver is a class which has a method called resolve. In that, this AEM team has written a code as to how this particular URL has to be resolved into the node or to the script. How exactly a URL, so basically how the URL is mapped to the resource. So that resource resolution code is written as part of the resolve function. Okay, so whenever you call the resource resolver.resolve and pass this path as an argument, then internally it knows how to resolve, how to connect to the this JCR and how exactly it has to resolve. Everything it already knows. So here we also have to know about the URL decomposition, which is Sling specific concepts. So all the relevant resources and the additional material, I'll put it in the description box for additional reference. You can check it out. Okay, so once this URL is passed on to that resolver function, then this URL is decomposed and it will identify the relevant node like this. Okay, so this particular node it will identify. This is about us node. So now this about us node is identified and the JCR content, whatever content is there, it will be passed on to the Sling main servlet again. Okay, so whatever is part of this, all this thing, right? Whatever is part of this JCR content, all these child nodes and everything will be passed on to the Sling main servlet. Okay, so then what happens is it is passing on to this Sling main servlet to do the script resolution. Till now, what happened? We have actually identified what is the content page which has to be rendered. So that we have identified. now the script has to be resolved. Okay, so how will the script be resolved is, it will come to this JCR content node and it will see this Sling resource type. Okay, so it will see, so this, all this is being done by the Sling main servlet again. Okay, it will see this Sling resource type and then it will see what is the path here. Okay, so what is the path? So this path will again be passed on to this resource resolver. So earlier we passed this path to the resource resolver. Now this path will be passed on to the resource resolver to identify what is the script that needs to be rendered. Okay, so this resource resolver type, right? So it could be either a script page like a HTML script or HTML script, or it could be a servlet also. Okay, so let us see the two different types here. Okay, so this is the HTML script resource. Okay, so HTML script looks something like this. So this path, if you go to /app/weekend components page, right? So you could see a script like this, a HTML script like this. Okay, or else the path which you have given here, it could be a servlet also. Instead of the HTML script, it could be a servlet also. Okay, so that is where the servlet registration will come. Okay, so this servlet will now become the OSGI service. Okay, the servlet, we can register any servlet as a OSGI service. Okay, so the process of the registration is like this. So this is the syntax. Okay, we have to say this is the OSGI component. Okay, and it is a service which is a servlet, and then we are giving here servlet resource type. Okay, so here we are giving the resource type, right? And we give certain path here. Okay, so this path we can use it here. Okay, we can use it here so that it automatically comes here and execute this code. Okay, so whenever you want to register a particular servlet on as a service, OSGI service, you could have two options. Okay, so one is you could register it using the resource type, and second thing is you could use it, you could register it using the servlet path like this, like /libs/sling sample HTML. So like that you could use either the path or you could use either the resource types. Okay, so the advantage of using this resource type is, if you have registered a Sling servlet using this resource type, then this resource type you can actually use it as part of this JCR content resource type path. And all the authentication and everything will be automatically handled by AEM. Like if the user has really access to that particular page or not, is he supposed to see the content of that particular servlet or not, everything will be automatically taken care. Okay, so that is the advantage of that. So this is how we register the servlet, okay, as a service, OSGI service. So let's go through this flow once again. Okay, the control came into the Sling servlet. It has searched for this particular path using the resource resolver.resolve function, and it was able to resolve this particular content node, and then it passed on that response to the Sling main servlet again. Then the Sling main servlet started resolving the scripts, okay, wherein it will check the Sling resource type of this JCR content, and it will identify the script path, and it will see, and it will try to execute that particular script in that particular path. Okay, so that script could be either HTML script or it could be a servlet. So if it is a servlet, then it is able to identify it with this resource type. Okay, so the same path which you have given here, you have given here also. So that is how it is able to identify which script, which servlet to execute. And also if you observe here we are passing the Sling HTTP servlet request. Okay, so this object is being injected by this script main servlet, Sling main servlet. Okay, you might have to see this flow multiple times to be able to understand properly. So if you just backtrack, right, here we have seen how exactly the HTTP servlet request came, and how exactly the Sling main servlet has wrapped that into the Sling servlet request, right, and it added this resource resolver function, and then here you see that being injected into here as a request object. And using this request object, again you can call this resource resolver, and you can try to resolve other nodes if you want in this particular script, and try to get some other data and do some other stuff, okay, in this particular servlet. Okay, now if you come on to this HTML script, right, this HTML script, though it appears to be like a HTML, this is also executed as a servlet. So how exactly this HTML script is being executed as a servlet? To understand that, we need to see what is the purpose of this HTML script. Okay, let's try to understand that first. Okay, so if you see here, right, why HTML? Why do we need a HTML language? In pure HTML, you will not be able to add or delete a particular div tag or any of the HTML tags. Either you need the HTML support or the backend framework support. Right, so you cannot add the for blocks also in the pure HTML. But if you are using a templating language, then you can use this if block and for block. So what are the examples of the templating language? So Angular, React are the JavaScript frameworks, okay, which are nothing but the templating languages. It gives you the ability to write the code in such a way that you can conditionally either show or remove a particular div tag. Okay, so it is a templating language. Similarly, HTML is also a templating language supported by the Sling framework. Okay, so why exactly do we need this templating language? It is because we want to achieve the separation of the concerns. Okay, so what is the separation of concern? So if you see here, right, the code here, it appears as if it is a HTML code. There is no mix-up of the HTML tags with some Java coding or PHP coding or any other coding. It appears as if it is a pure HTML. Okay, and we are separating this particular markup from the actual content. So if you see here, the data slide use dot model, and we are calling a particular Java code here, right? A particular Java code is being called here. So this Java code knows how to get that content, and it will pass on that particular content into this particular variable. Okay, so the main idea here is how can we separate the markup from the content. Markup is like how exactly you need to render the content. So that has to be defined as part of the HTML. But how do you get the content itself has to be as a separate class or separate backend code. So to achieve that separation of concern, we use Sling models. So if the HTML is a front-end code which defines how a markup can be done or how a content can be rendered, so that is defined as part of the HTML. But how exactly you retrieve that particular content is defined as part of this Sling model. Okay, so that is a Sling model. So now, as we have discussed earlier, this HTML script is also a servlet, we are saying, right? So how exactly it will be done? So what it does is, this entire script, it will just wrap everything this as a text variable, okay, and then it will pass on to a servlet. So that servlet, what it does is, it will go line by line, and it will interpret these keywords like data use Sling model. It will interpret this, and that servlet knows what to do. Once it is seeing this particular syntax, what it has to do, how it has to get the content, everything that servlet knows. So that servlet will convert this particular code into the backend code, and it will execute it, and as a response it will send us the pure HTML. Okay, so this HTML script, though you are putting it as part of the HTML file, one thing which we must not forget is this is not a front-end code. So this code is being wrapped and sent to a servlet in the backend. So while you are loading the page, right, so all this execution of the Sling models and going to the Sling model and getting the content, everything is happening at the backend. And what you see in the front end is the pure HTML code. Okay, so that's why if you have to pass any variable from this particular Sling model, let us suppose, onto the JavaScript, you cannot do it in a direct way, because the JavaScript is in the client side. It is sitting in the client browser. It is sitting in the browser, but this code is being executed in the server. So until and unless this code is being shifted onto the browser doesn't know anything about this. But by the time the code is actually shifted onto the browser, this HTML doesn't exist anymore. or these variables doesn't exist anymore, because what is being shifted onto the client is a pure HTML. So that is what we need to understand. Okay, so this entire HTML is being executed by a servlet in the backend. Okay, and JavaScript is in the front end. So this is in the backend. Okay, this entire code is in the backend, and a servlet is interpreting this line by line and converting it to the HTML, and the HTML will be passed on to the JavaScript. So the only way you can, so if you have to send any variable from this model onto the JavaScript, the only way you can do it is using these attributes. So you just have to add one attribute and put the value of that variable in this particular HTML attributes, and then that HTML attribute is being rendered into the HTML, this HTML attribute, right? This will be rendered as a HTML code, and that HTML code will be sent on to the JavaScript, and then JavaScript can access this particular attribute using either ID or the class name. Okay, so there is an indirect way of doing it, but there is no direct way you can directly access this particular object's code into the JavaScript. Okay, so that's one thing which we need to remember. Okay, so the final concept here is we are trying to do all this to achieve the separation of the concerns. Okay, so how do we separate the markup, which is how to render that particular content in the UI using the for loops and if loops and everything. How to render that particular content from how that particular content has to be retrieved. Okay, so how that particular content is to be retrieved is in the Sling model. Okay, so now whenever as I told, this particular code is being executed by a servlet, right, internally. So whenever that particular servlet sees this particular path, right, then again it will call this. So then again it will call this resource resolver to identify the script again. Okay, so again this is also a script, right? So this is a path. Okay, so this path has to be identified again. By whom? By the servlet which is trying to interpret this particular HTML code. Okay, so whenever it sees this particular line and it sees this package name, so it will try to resolve this package name and identify the code and execute that particular code. Okay, so that's how it knows like where exactly this code is. So now you need to understand one difference. So there is a servlet, okay, which you have registered as a OSGI service. Okay, so this servlet is retrieved by using the path. Okay, so this resource type path or Sling servlet path which you have given, so it is being accessed directly from the browser. So you go to the browser and give this particular path and it will hit the servlet and get you the response. Okay, so that's how it works. But this one is not like that. Okay, so this one is not being accessed by the path. Okay, so this one is being accessed by the package name. So you need to make sure that in your project archetype you have this COM, Adobe, AEM guide. So this folder structure, you need to make sure this exists in the same way. Only then this particular class will be retrieved by or resolved by the our resource resolver. So ultimately this script, this Sling model is also resolved, and this code also is being called, and everything is being converted into the HTML, and ultimately after it is being converted to the HTML, then it will send it to the client. Okay, so here the web browser, right? So then it will also cache at the dispatcher and all the in the CDN also, and all this caching also will happen. Okay, so this is how this end-to-end flow works. And again, as I told, you need to repeat this flow in your mind, because we get multiple reference codes in online, and if we want to implement any of the business logic, we can just copy paste the reference code. But if you are stuck somewhere, right, to debug where exactly the issue is, you need to understand the entire flow. Okay, so you need to understand the end-to-end flow. Only then you will be able to debug where exactly the issue is and ultimately be able to resolve it. Okay, hope this video has helped you. Please leave any comments in the comment section if you have any questions or any suggestions, etc. And please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.